My name is Rachel, and if you ask my mother, she'll tell you I was the family mistake. Not the happy accident kind. Not the, we didn't plan you, but we're so glad you're here kind. No, I was the kind of mistake that gets whispered about at family gatherings. The kind that's used as a warning to others. I was 17 the first time she said it to my face, but I'd felt it my whole life. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that's supposed to be forgettable. I was sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over a stack of college applications, my pen tapping against the edge of the form. My mum stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot, her back to me. The radio played softly, some old song she liked, but the air between us was thick with things unsaid. I just asked her if she could look over my essay. I'd worked on it for weeks, pouring every ounce of hope and desperation into those paragraphs. I wanted her to be proud, to see that I was trying to build a future for myself, even if she never seemed to notice. She didn't turn around. She just sighed, the kind of sigh that says more than words ever could. "Rachel, why do you keep pushing this?" she said, her voice flat. "You know we can't afford college. You know you're not like your brother. He got scholarships. He made us proud. You just make things harder." I stared at the back of her head, willing her to turn around, to see me. "I just want you to read it," I said quietly. "That's all." She finally turned, wooden spoon in hand, her eyes cold. "You know what your problem is. You never know when to quit. You always want more than what you have. That's why you're always disappointed. That's why you're the family mistake." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to run. But I just sat there, frozen, the essay crumpling in my fist. She turned back to the stove, humming along to the radio, as if she hadn't just shattered me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. Family mistake. I wondered if she'd always felt that way, or if it was just easier to blame me for everything that went wrong. My dad was no better. He was always working, always tired, always looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. My brother, Daniel, was the golden child. Straight A's, varsity athlete, the one who never got in trouble. He barely spoke to me anymore, not since he left for college. I was alone in that house, even when it was full. The next morning, I woke up early, hoping to catch my mum in a better mood. I found her in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, a cup of coffee steaming in front of her. I hesitated in the doorway, clutching my essay, but she didn't look up. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me, her eyes tired. "What now, Rachel?" I swallowed hard. I want to know why you said that. Why am I the mistake?" She set her phone down, rubbing her temples. "Rachel, I was young when I had you, too young. Your dad and I weren't ready. We fought all the time, money was tight. You were always sick, always needing something. It was hard. I'm not saying I don't love you, but you have to understand. You changed everything. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if things had gone differently." I felt the words settle in my chest like stones. I wanted to argue, to tell her that none of it was my fault, that I didn't ask to be born. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She'd already made up her mind. I left the house that day with a new kind of determination. If I was the mistake, then I'd be the kind of mistake that proved everyone wrong. I threw myself into my studies, working late into the night, taking on extra shifts at the diner down the street. I saved every dollar, every tip, every bit of hope I could scrape together. I applied for scholarships, grants, anything that might get me out of that house. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. My mum barely spoke to me, except to criticise. My dad was a ghost, drifting in and out, never really seeing me. Daniel came home for the holidays, but he barely acknowledged me, too busy with his new friends, his new life. I was invisible. The day the acceptance letter came, I almost didn't open it. I found it in the mailbox, sandwiched between bills and junk mail, the university's logo stamped in the corner. My hands shook as I tore it open, my heart pounding. I read the first line over and over, not believing it was real. "Congratulations, Rachel. We are pleased to offer you admission." I ran inside, clutching the letter, hope blooming in my chest for the first time in years. I found my mum in the living room, watching TV, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen. "Mum, I got in," I said, breathless. "I got into college. They gave me a scholarship."
"I can go."
She didn't look up. "That's nice, Rachel," she said, her voice flat. "They don't expect us to help. We don't have anything left to give you." The words stung, but I refused to let them crush me. I packed my bags that summer, scraping together enough for a bus ticket and a suitcase full of second-hand clothes. I left a note on the kitchen table, thanking them for everything, even if it wasn't much. I didn't look back. For years, I built a life from scratch. I worked 2 jobs, studied late into the night, made friends who became my family. I graduated with honours, found a job, rented a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. I was free. But freedom is a strange thing. It's sweet, but it's also lonely. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if my mum ever thought about me, if she missed me, if she regretted calling me the family mistake. I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was, I did. The years passed, and with every season, the distance between me and my family grew wider. I watched from afar as Daniel's life unfolded in glossy social media posts, graduations, job promotions, engagement photos with a girl who looked like she belonged in a magazine. My parents were always in the background, arms around him, beaming with pride. I was never in those pictures. Sometimes I wondered if they told people they only had one child. I tried to move on. I built routines, filled my days with work and study, and surrounded myself with people who saw me for who I was, not who I wasn't. My best friend Lila became my anchor. She was the first person I told about the family mistake label. She didn't laugh or pity me. She just hugged me and said, "You're not a mistake, Rachel. You're a miracle for surviving them." Still, the past had a way of creeping in. On my 21st birthday, I got a card in the mail. No return address, just my name written in my mother's careful, slanted handwriting. Inside was a generic birthday card, the kind you buy in a hurry at the grocery store. The message was short. "Hope you're well, Mum." No apology, no warmth, just a reminder that I was still an afterthought. I didn't reply. I told myself I was done needing anything from her. But the truth was, every time I saw a mother and daughter laughing together in a cafe, or a family cheering at a graduation, something inside me ached. I wanted to believe I could outgrow that ache, but it lingered, a bruise that never fully faded. After college, I landed a job at a small publishing house. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and I loved it. I spent my days surrounded by stories, other people's pain, hope, and redemption. Sometimes I wondered if I'd ever have the courage to write my own. One rainy afternoon, as I was sorting through manuscripts, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Rachel, it's Daniel." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't spoken to my brother since the day I left home. I remembered him as a teenager, all confidence and easy smiles, never looking back as he walked out the door. Now his voice sounded older, strained. "Daniel, is everything okay?" He hesitated. I didn't know who else to call. Mum's in the hospital, Dad's a mess. I know it's been a long time, but she keeps asking for you. I felt the old anger flare up, mingled with something softer. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Why would she want to see me now? He sighed. I don't know. She's been talking about the past a lot. Regrets, mistakes. She said your name last night, over and over. Please, Rachel, I think she needs you. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up and go back to my safe, quiet life. But I couldn't. Not completely. Not after everything. I still wanted to be seen. I'll come, I said quietly. Text me the hospital address. The drive back to my hometown felt surreal. The streets looked smaller, the houses older, but the memories were as sharp as ever. I parked outside the hospital, my hands shaking as I walked through the sliding doors. The smell of antiseptic and coffee hit me, and I was 17 again, waiting for someone to tell me I mattered. Daniel met me in the lobby. He looked tired, his hair flecked with grey, worry lines etched deep into his forehead. For a moment we just stared at each other, unsure how to bridge the years between us. Hey, he said finally. Hey, I replied. He led me down a long hallway, past nurses and beeping machines, to a small room at the end. My dad sat in a chair by the window, staring out at the rain. He looked older, smaller, like life had worn him down. He didn't look up as we entered. My mum was lying in the bed, pale and frail, her hair pulled back from her face. She looked nothing like the woman I remembered, softer somehow, her edges dulled by time and illness. Her eyes fluttered open as we approached. "Rachel?" she whispered. I nodded, unsure what to say. For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of machines. She reached for my hand, her grip weak but insistent. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I was so wrong. About everything. About you." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why did it take all this for you to see me?" She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I was scared. I thought if I pushed you away, it would hurt less when you left. But you were never the mistake, Rachel. I was." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to believe her, to let the years of pain melt away in an instant. But forgiveness isn't that simple. It's not a switch you can flip, no matter how much you want to. I sat with her for hours, listening as she talked about the past, her regrets, her fears, the things she wished she could change. Daniel and my dad drifted in and out, each carrying their own burdens. For the first time, I saw them not as villains, but as people, flawed, scared, and desperately human. When visiting hours ended, I stood to leave. My mum squeezed my hand, her eyes pleading. "Will you come back tomorrow?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come back." That night, I lay in a cheap motel room staring at the ceiling, the rain tapping against the window. I thought about all the years I'd spent running from my family, from the pain they caused. I realized that coming back wasn't about them, it was about me, about finding closure, about proving to myself that I was more than the label they gave me. The next morning I returned to the hospital. My mum was sitting up, looking stronger. She smiled when she saw me, a real smile, not the forced one I remembered. "Thank you for coming back," she said. I sat beside her, unsure what the future would hold. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The days blurred together in the hospital. I visited every morning, sometimes staying until the nurses gently nudged me out at night. My mother and I talked about everything and nothing: her childhood, my childhood, the years we'd lost. Sometimes she'd drift off mid-sentence, her hands still wrapped around mine, as if afraid I'd disappear if she let go. Daniel visited too, but he was different now. The easy confidence he'd worn as a teenager was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. One afternoon, as we sat in the hospital cafeteria, he pushed his coffee aside and looked at me with tired eyes. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he said, "for not being there, for letting Mum and Dad treat you the way they did. I was so caught up in my own life, I didn't see what was happening to you." I shrugged, unsure how to respond. "You were just a kid, Daniel. We both were." He shook his head. "No, I was old enough to know better. I should have stood up for you. I should have been your brother." His words settled between us, heavy with regret. I realized then that we'd both been victims of the same house, the same expectations, the same unspoken rules. Maybe he'd been the golden child, but that came with its own price. As the days passed, my mother's health improved. The doctors talked about releasing her soon, and the thought filled me with a strange mix of relief and dread. What would happen when she went home? Would we slip back into old patterns, or could we build something new? One evening, as the sun set outside her window, my mother turned to me, her eyes serious. "Rachel, I want you to come home, just for a little while. I want us to try again." The request caught me off guard. I'd spent so long building a life away from that house, away from the pain. The thought of returning, even temporarily, made my chest tighten. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "That place, it's full of ghosts." She nodded, understanding. "I know I can't erase the past, but I want to try to make things right. I want you to know you're wanted, that you always were, even if I was too blind to see it." I promised to think about it. That night I called Lila, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. "Do what feels right for you," she said gently. "You don't owe them anything, Rachel, but if you want to try, I'll be here for you, no matter what." I spent the next day wandering my old neighborhood, the streets both familiar and foreign. I passed my childhood home, the paint peeling, the garden overgrown. I remembered playing in the yard, dreaming of escape, never imagining I'd one day return by choice. When I finally made my decision, it wasn't out of obligation or guilt. It was for me. I wanted to see if healing was possible, if forgiveness could grow in the cracks left by years of hurt. I moved back in with my parents for a few weeks, just until my mother was strong enough to manage on her own. The house felt smaller than I remembered, the walls closing in with memories. That things were different now. My mother tried, really tried, to connect. She asked about my job, my friends, my dreams. She apologized, not just once, but over and over, each time a little more sincere. My dad was quieter, but I saw the change in him too. He started joining us for dinner, asking about my day, listening instead of lecturing. Daniel visited often, bringing his fiancée, who treated me like family from the start. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, old wounds that reopened at the slightest touch. But there were also moments of laughter, of shared stories of tentative hope. One night, as we sat around the dinner table, my mother reached for my hand. "I know I can't undo the things I said," she whispered, "but I want you to know, You're not the family mistake. You're the reason we're still a family at all." The words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I believed her. As the weeks passed, I found myself letting go of old resentments. I started to see my parents not as the architects of my pain, but as people, flawed, struggling, trying to do better. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what they'd done, but about freeing myself from the weight of it. When my mother was finally well enough to be on her own, I packed my bags, ready to return to my life. My parents hugged me at the door, their embrace lingering, as if afraid to let me go again. "Come back soon," my mum said, her voice thick with emotion. "I will," I promised. Back in my apartment, I felt lighter, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been set down. I called Lila, telling her everything, and she cheered for me, her joy infectious. "You did it, Rachel," she said. "You broke the cycle." But life has a way of testing you, even when you think you've found peace. A few months later, I got a call from Daniel. He sounded panicked, his words tumbling over each other. "Rachel, I need your help. Mum and Dad, they lost everything. Dad's business went under, the house is gone. They have nowhere to go." The news hit me like a punch. After everything, after all the years of being pushed aside, now they needed me. I took a deep breath, the old pain threatening to resurface. But I remembered the promise I'd made to myself, to be better, to choose compassion over bitterness. "Tell them to come," I said quietly. "They can stay with me." That night, as I waited for them to arrive, I thought about how far I'd come. I wasn't the family mistake. I was the one who opened the door when everyone else had closed it. It was a cold evening when my parents arrived at my apartment, their car packed with the remnants of a life that had unravelled. I watched from the window as they stepped out, moving slowly, weighed down by exhaustion and defeat. For a moment, I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle, memories of old wounds flickering in my mind. But then I opened it, letting them in from the chill. My mother's eyes were red, her face drawn and pale. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him, his shoulders slumped, his hands trembling as he carried a battered suitcase. They stood in the entryway, uncertain, as if unsure they were truly welcome. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside. They shuffled inside, glancing around at the small but tidy space I'd made my own. I'd spent the afternoon clearing out the spare room, making up the bed with fresh sheets, setting out towels, trying to make it feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a home. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you, Rachel. We didn't know where else to go." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You're here now. That's what matters." The first few days were awkward, filled with silences and careful politeness. My parents tried to help around the apartment, washing dishes, folding laundry, but I could see the shame in their eyes. They were used to being in control, to having answers. Now they were lost, adrift in a world that had moved on without them. At night, I heard them talking in hushed voices behind the closed door of the spare room. Sometimes my mother cried, her sobs muffled by the pillow. My father would try to comfort her, but his words were thin, brittle, unable to hold back the tide of regret. I tried to give them space, but I also made an effort to include them in my life. I invited them to join me for dinner, to watch movies, to take walks in the park. Slowly, the walls between us began to crumble. My mother started opening up, telling me stories from her childhood, her dreams and disappointments. My father apologized for the years he'd spent distant, for the times he'd chosen silence over support. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, my mother turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "I never thought we'd end up here," she said. "I spent so many years trying to be strong, to hold everything together. I thought if I was hard on you, it would make you tougher, more prepared for the world. But all I did was push you away." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We can't change the past, Mum, but we can try to do better now." She nodded, her grip tightening. "I'm so proud of you, Rachel. I know I never said it before, but I am. You built this life on your own. You survived us." My father cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "You're not the family mistake, Rachel. If anything, we were the ones who made mistakes. We let our fears and pride get in the way of loving you the way you deserved." The words I'd longed to hear for years finally reached me, not as an apology, but as an admission of their own humanity. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about accepting that we were all just people, doing our best with what we had. As the weeks went by, my parents began to find their footing again. My father picked up odd jobs, fixing things around the building, helping neighbours with repairs. My mother volunteered at the local library, reading to children, rediscovering a gentler side of herself. They started to smile more, to laugh, to find joy in small things. Daniel visited often, bringing groceries and checking in on all of us. He and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced. His fiancée, Emily, became like a sister to me, always ready with a kind word or a listening ear. One afternoon, as we sat together in the park, Daniel turned to me, his expression serious. "You know, you could have turned us away. No one would have blamed you. After everything, you had every right." I shook my head. "Maybe, but I didn't want to be defined by the pain anymore. I wanted to be the person I needed when I was younger. Someone who opens the door, even when it's hard." He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "You're stronger than any of us, Rachel. You always were." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The years of loneliness, the struggle to find my place, the pain of being called a mistake. I realized that every hardship, every wound, had shaped me into someone capable of compassion, of resilience, of love. My parents stayed with me for several months, slowly rebuilding their lives. When they finally found a small apartment of their own, we celebrated together, not as a broken family, but as people who had learned to forgive, to heal, to start again. On the day they moved out, my mother hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my shoulder. "Thank you for giving us a second chance," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us." I hugged her back, my heart full. "We're family, Mum. That's what we do." As I watched them drive away, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. I wasn't the family mistake. I was the proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even the most broken families could find their way back to each other. After my parents moved into their new apartment, life settled into a gentle rhythm. We called each other every week, sometimes just to share a recipe or talk about the weather, sometimes to reminisce about the past with a softness that would have been impossible years before. The bitterness that once coloured every memory began to fade, replaced by something warmer, more forgiving. I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. There were still scars, of course, moments when an old hurt would flare up, or when a careless word would remind me of the pain I'd carried for so long. But those moments no longer defined me. I had learned to let them pass, to breathe through them, to remember that I was not the sum of my family's mistakes. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted past my window, I sat at my desk and began to write. For years, I'd helped others tell their stories, but I'd never told my own. Now the words poured out of me. Memories of loneliness and longing, of anger and hope, of the night my mother called me the family mistake, and the day she returned crying at my door. I wrote about the ache of being invisible, the hunger for approval, the desperate need to prove that I was worthy of love. I wrote about the small victories, the scholarship letter, the first apartment, the friends who became family. I wrote about forgiveness, not as a gift to my parents, but as a gift to myself. As I wrote, I realized that my story was not just about pain, but about survival. It was about finding light in the darkest places, about choosing compassion over resentment, about opening the door even when every instinct screamed to keep it shut. It was about the power of truth and the freedom that comes from refusing to let someone else's words define your worth. Months passed and my manuscript grew. I shared it with Lila, who read every page with tears in her eyes.
"You have to share this," she said. "There are so many people who need to know they're not alone." With her encouragement, I submitted my story to a publisher. To my surprise, they loved it. The day I held the first printed copy in my hands, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd ever known. My name on the cover, my words on the page, a testament to everything I'd survived. When the book was released, I received messages from strangers all over the world. Some shared their own stories of being the family mistake, of growing up in the shadow of someone else's expectations. Others wrote to say that my story had given them hope, that it had helped them find the courage to forgive, to heal, to start again. One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was soft, almost shy. "I read your book," she said. "I cried through the whole thing. I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you. I wish I could take it all back." I listened, my heart full of complicated emotions. "You can't change the past, Mum," I said gently. "But you changed the ending. That's what matters." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm proud of you, Rachel. I hope you know that now." "I do," I replied, and for the first time, I truly meant it. As the years went by, our family continued to heal. There were new traditions, Sunday dinners, birthday parties, quiet afternoons spent together. Daniel and Emily had a baby, and I became an aunt. My parents doted on their grandchild, their laughter echoing through the apartment, a sound I'd once thought I'd never hear again. Sometimes, when I looked at my family gathered around the table, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed she was a mistake, who dreamed of escape, who longed for a place to belong. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her that things would get better, that she would find her way, that she would become the person she needed most. I learned that families are not defined by perfection, but by the willingness to try again, to forgive, to love in spite of everything. I learned that it's never too late to open the door, to let someone back in, to start over. And I learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being the one who refuses to give up, not just on others, but on yourself. If you're reading this, and you've ever been called a mistake, if you've ever felt invisible or unwanted, I want you to know you are not alone. Your story matters. Your pain is real, but so is your power to heal. You are not defined by the words of others, but by the choices you make, the love you give, and the courage you show every day. My mother once called me the family mistake, but when she returned crying at my door, I realized that I was never the mistake. I was the answer.
I was the proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the most broken families can find their way home. And if I could do it, so can you.